Gen Z homeless YouTubers are having a major moment right now. Out of all the hot social media trends that have come and gone over the years, this is definitely one of the more bizarre ones. On second thought, however, in this insane world and this ridiculously horrible economy we're all living in, it shouldn't really come as that big of a surprise to anyone. A young Japanese van lifer known as Nomad Push on YouTube has skyrocketed to an insane 344,000 subscribers in barely over a year on YouTube. He's inspired the likes of fellow Japanese homeless streamer Vagabond, who literally just started posting exactly 2 weeks ago and has only uploaded 2 videos so far. He has already reached an insane 20,000 subscribers and nearly 400,000 views. Now, haters out there will probably say they're coping, that they're just a bunch of losers trying to glamorize homelessness. But as a relatively successful YouTuber myself, if there's one thing I can tell you about YouTube, is that the algorithm is brutally honest and literally never lies. The fact that they've blown up to such overnight fame in such a short amount of time proves that they've tapped into something that the masses have been craving for. When you look at their videos and thumbnails, you see that it's a stark contrast, the literal exact opposite of all the multi-millionaire hustle culture videos that dominated YouTube 5 to 7 years ago. Instead of showing off how they make $10,000 a day or have 13 different streams of income, they're showing off a minimalist but free and fulfilling life of living off as little as $1.3 per day in a Japanese doya. Comments have been flooding in with nothing but praise and support, telling them that they're brave, courageous, even inspiring. The message at this point is clear. The world has changed and there's a new meta in the game of life. Hustle culture and consumerism are out. Minimalism and anti-consumerism are in. Gen Z has found a new freedom and purpose in being able to live without having to work and spending as little money as humanly possible. The ramifications for this are absolutely huge, from freeing ourselves from the shackles of debt slavery to fixing the economy and saving the planet. This is why Gen Z isn't spending money anymore and why it might just make all our lives much better. So, in order to understand why the anti-consumerism of Gen Z might just save us, we first have to take a deep dive into how the excessive consumerism of our favorite generation here on this channel, the baby boomers, is probably responsible for over 90% of the problems we're facing in the economy right now. The booming post-war economy boomers grew up in allowed a lot of them to be totally reckless with their spending and consumerism with absolutely no consequence. Well, not no consequences. No consequences they had to deal with. Per usual, they simply passed down the horrifying consequences of their decisions onto future generations, onto us Gen Z and millennials. Growing up as a millennial with baby boomer parents, I had a first-hand experience of witnessing their insane, excessive consumerism. Every one of them had multiple credit cards, multiple massive bank loans and mortgages, 2 or 3 fancy cars, not because they needed them, but because the neighbors bought one, and so they felt the need to keep up with the Joneses. You saw stories all the time on TV about couples who already had decent jobs with decent pay, still felt compelled to go $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in credit card debt just to buy shit to impress their neighbors. Now, the best part of all this is that in typical boomer fashion, they themselves, for the most part, never had to face any of the consequences of their own reckless consumerism. Because, well, of course they wouldn't. Those consequences would be, of course, passed on to us to have to deal with. The 2008 financial crash that permanently ruined the economy for us millennials was a direct result of how baby boomers took out massive mortgages for houses they couldn't realistically afford, and when they couldn't pay them back, the housing bubble burst and we all felt the consequences. This is why it's also known as the subprime mortgage crisis. Before 2008, getting a job was actually quite simple, even for a high schooler. Lots of my friends friends in high school easily got summer jobs in the early to mid 2000s, but after the 2008 crash, this is where the new reality of having to apply 700 times just to get a few interviews set in. And as you've all experienced, it hasn't really changed even up until this day. The economy never really recovered from 2008. Even to this day, a lot of the massive inflation and insane prices crushing us financially every damn day are a direct result of the excessive overspending, overborrowing, and overconsumption habits of baby boomers. This set up the economic debt slave system we live in, known as usury. The official definition of usury is known as the action or practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest. Throughout history, even in the ancient world, usury has been universally frowned upon as incredibly immoral and unethical. This is because not only is it incredibly detrimental for the individual, it drives up prices to absolute unsustainable levels in the broader overall market as well. We've all seen and experienced this firsthand in the world of college tuition, credit cards, housing prices, and hell, even sandwiches have buy now, pay later options at this point. Just to highlight how crushing and oppressive the modern system of debt slavery is, let's compare the average Gen Z debt slave in the West to a literal urban Roman slave back in the Roman Empire. We're not even talking about an average Roman citizen here, a literal Roman slave. First, let's set some basic parameters to ensure an honest and objective comparison. In my last video about Roman slaves, a lot of defenders of modern capitalism claimed that I was unfairly cherry-picking the best of Roman slaves living in the urban city centers with the wealthier masters. I'm not gonna lie, this is another typical capitalist projection of their own cherry-picking. If you zoom out of your Western capitalist bubble for just 1 second, you'll notice that the entire success story of capitalism itself is one massive cherry pick. Bangladesh sweatshop workers, child cobalt miners in Africa, and migrant agricultural workers are just as much a part of the global capitalist economy as an average Gen Z kid in America. If you want to compare the worst conditions of Roman slaves working in the mines, it's only intellectually honest to compare them to the worst conditions of cobalt miners working under modern capitalism. Shockingly enough, they both have very similarly brutally short lifespans. In order to get historically accurate and intellectually honest comparisons, you have to compare like to like. For example, it wouldn't be honest to say that Kim Jong-un has an incredibly luxurious life under communism compared to an average Gen Z kid in the West. Therefore, communism is now the superior system. So let's do a historically accurate and intellectually honest comparison by once again comparing like to like. An average Gen Z kid in the West, despite all the very real problems we face, is still probably within the top 20% globally when it comes to overall standard of living. Let me be clear, this isn't to say that you have it easy at all, just that the rest of the world has it even far worse under modern capitalism. Given those parameters, it's only fair to compare your situation to that of a top 20% urban Roman slave. Once again, compare like to like. Let me clarify one final thing. When I say a top 20% urban Roman slave, I'm not talking about the top 20% within urban slaves. According to historians, urban Roman slaves made up around 30% of the total Roman slave population. So, not the majority, but not a tiny minority by any means either. So, I'm talking about the top upper 2/3 of urban Roman slaves, which was about the top 20% of the overall Roman slave population. For starters, here's how the scene at a typical Roman slave market looked. Prospective slaves were put on a stage and then a price tag was set based on their origin, age, education, skills, experience, and more. Slaves varied greatly in price, obviously, but on average they cost around 5 years' worth of wages for an average Roman citizen. This sounds incredibly dehumanizing to be clear, but as I was researching and making this video, for some reason I couldn't really explain, I actually felt strangely jealous of them. And then it hit me. Your slave master back then actually had to pay a hefty amount to invest in you and to have the rights to your services. In today's debt slavery system, you're the one who has to pay the bank and the college 5 years worth of wages just to have the ability to enter the modern wage slave market. This is literally how big of a joke the system is now. Not only are we wage slaves, we're literally paying tens of thousands of dollars for the right to be a wage slave. Hey guys, we set out on a mission during the summer to take down the biggest, most vile Gen Z hater, the Angry Guy. A straight up horrible human being who hates Gen Z so much, he even celebrates them dying. Thanks to you, we've gained a ton of ground on him over the summer, and we've set a new goal to surpass him in subscribers and defeat him once and for all by the end of the year. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest, most evil, final boss Gen Z hater. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Another really stupid comment I got on my last video about Roman slaves was that slaves back then didn't get paid. First of all, this is actually straight up just factually incorrect. Roman slaves did receive wages in the form of peculium, which could eventually be used to buy their freedom in the form of manumission, which we'll dive into later. Spoiler alert, manumission was a lot more achievable than escaping debt slavery today. The second reason this statement is just straight up dumb is because although they didn't receive wages in the traditional sense, they did receive compensation in the form of guaranteed food and shelter. Roman slave masters were under legal obligation to feed and house their slaves. In the modern day wage slave system, on the other hand, you get paid such low dogshit wages that, as you've all experienced, in most cases are not even enough to cover basic food and shelter anymore. I've had personal firsthand experience with this. In my own journey of escaping the 9-to-5, I spent a lot of time volunteering in hostels for free food and accommodation. I only had to work 20 hours per week, and I was able to save up way more money than working 40 hours a week at a regular job because my basic survival needs of food and shelter were covered. Having basic survival needs like food and shelter covered was an incredible absolute game changer for an urban Roman slave. The small amount of extra peculium they earned gave them a path to one day buy their freedom in a process known as manumission, where a slave was formally and legally freed, though in most cases they didn't even have to pay for their own manumission. Manumission rates were astonishingly high amongst the urban slave population. Historical estimates put manumission rates at as high as 80 to 90%. Manumission typically happened between the ages of 30 to 35, meaning that in the ancient Roman Empire, you were often a free man with no debt by the time you were 30. Modern day Gen Z, on the other hand, is looking at an average around 20 years just to be able to pay off their student loan debts. And even this is being extremely generous at this point, with around half of college graduates being unemployed or underemployed even after they get their degree in this horrible job market. Once an urban Roman slave achieved manumission by the age of 30, he actually had a pretty decent starting point in life. He'd typically have some skills and experience from working with his master. He'd have a decent amount of cash savings he could use to start a business or just to enjoy his freedom. He had a guaranteed client relationship with his former master, and he even had inheritance rights and could inherit from his master after he died. The result of this is that home ownership was actually very achievable and realistic for an urban Roman slave within a decade or so after manumission. A lot of former urban Roman slaves went on to be quite wealthy and influential. Meanwhile, the Gen Z housing market is so screwed that we're being hit with the brilliant idea of a 50-year mortgage as a solution now.
Every generation of Americans that are living today have it easier. Much, much easier than the vast majority of humans that have ever lived.
You serious?
Now, let's be fair here. Roman slavery, even for the lucky urban slaves, wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. They had no legal rights or personhood, meaning they could be beaten and even unalived by their master with no legal consequences. Though this typically didn't happen nearly as often as you think. Remember that a Roman slave typically cost around 5 years worth of wages. In most cases, you're not going to just unalive them when you have to make such a hefty financial investment in them. It's like how you could technically vandalize or destroy your own car today. You're generally not going to do that, even though legally you could, because you had to work a lot and save up a lot of money to buy it. The overall point of this comparison isn't to romanticize Roman slavery. It's to highlight and make a scathing indictment on just how bad and immoral the modern debt slave system is. And I think the main reason Gen Z homeless streamers are having a major impact on the masses right now is because we've all experienced by now just how crushing the way of consumerism and debt slavery is. They're showing us a serious potential solution to it, a light at the end of the tunnel. They're not showing off expensive, luxurious lifestyles. They're showing off how they can be free, happy, and healthy while living off as little money as possible. And this really just feels like the only way out of debt slavery, wage slavery, and just a massive overall scam the entire system was built upon at this point. This is the new meta, the new hot trend. Hustle culture is out, anti-consumption is in. Now, we talked a lot about just how bad consumerism and modern debt slavery is in this video, but I'm sure at this point you also want some practical everyday tips on how you can implement these anti-consumption habits in your own day-to-day life as well. And I got good news for you, as not too long ago, we made an entire video covering exactly that, which you can check out right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you there.